Welcome to Corpse Club, the official podcast of DailyDead.com. I'm one of your co-hosts, Jonathan James, and today I'm joined by Bryan Christopher and Derek Anderson. Today we are going to discuss Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the new one. It's on Netflix. A lot of people have seen it. I know if you've been online at any time over the last week, you know a lot of people have opinions on it. We do too, and so we'll be talking all things Texas Chainsaw Massacre. We're also going to discuss Peacemaker and more. But first, I want to give a very special shout out to a very special Corpse Club co-host. And it's Bryan's birthday today. It's not his birthday when you're listening, but it's his birthday when we're recording. So Bryan, I want to wish you a very, very happy birthday.
Thank you.
Happy birthday.
Feeling very old. And if you're hearing this and you haven't already wished me a happy birthday, it is too late. And it's been noted and kept in the back of my mind for later use.
Ooh. See, that's why I made sure it's on record that I wished you a happy birthday now, because I knew you had that list over there. But no,
twice.
Yeah, you shouldn't be feeling very old at all. We'll look back at this, 20, 30 years now, and you'll be like, I thought I was old 30 years ago. It's just a number. But
I'm very tickled by the idea that we are still doing this in 30 years.
Oh, we will. It'll be, even if it's just like a reunion, it'll be, it's what do you call it? It's weekly, and then it'll go to monthly, and then it'll be yearly, and then it'll like every 5 years.
We're talking in a basement. We're quote unquote recording in like a tomato can with a string that's not tied to anything. It'll be weird, but it'll still be fun.
Exactly. Yeah. It might never be released. I'll just call you on the phone and I'll start the intro. I always do. I promise one day I will do this. I always promise to Scott that one day I'll call him on the phone and it'll just be an episode of Corpse Club.
Just a cold opening.
Exactly. I'll just be like, welcome to Corpse Club. But one of these days it'll happen.
What is this? Corpse Club Cranker Anchors?
I mean, but he'll have a sort of an idea of what's going on. The only thing that stopped me is that like I need to make sure it's a time where he's available for a little bit. Like he has to be around long enough to have the episode. So anyway, so we'll see. One of these days it will happen. But yeah, we keep going on. We keep shambling. The Walking Dead. But we're not on zombies yet. We're on cannibals and cannibal families. We're talking Texas Chainsaw. And like I said, it's interesting because, it seems lately that no matter what the movie is, there's a lot of discourse and a lot of, back and forth. I hate this movie. I love this movie. Some people end up being in between, but very few, if you just, assume that the world is exactly like social media, which it is not. It's sampling, of course, but anyway, like I said, it's interesting whether it's I don't know, Malignant or especially Halloween Kills, or now with Texas Chainsaw, about people are very opinionated, and it's like I said, it's kind of interesting to watch this, having this feedback, having watched horror movies back in the 80s. It was, when I was growing up, it was such an exciting feeling to be able to discover a new horror movie or to be able to watch one with your friends. And we knew they weren't going to be great. We knew that there were going to be things that were, either we didn't like about them in a lot of cases, especially like with a lot of the Italian horror movies. If you were a young kid, a lot of people were just watching them for those gore scenes. And so, whether you loved Texas Chainsaw Massacre, hated it, or somewhere in the middle, I do find all the back and forth kind of funny because I'd say at this point, in some way, kind of like superhero movies, we're spoiled by just how many horror movies are out there and available, that this movie is receiving such, like I said, such varied feedback. But
social media is funny too, because it's kind of like the company reply all fiasco just on steroids. You know that thing where like someone will send out a company-wide email and someone for some reason will reply all to it, and then it'll just turn into like this massive vortex of other people replying all to it, and then it turns into you get a bunch of people who are replying to say don't reply all, and they add to it, and it's just like the discussion about every new movie that comes out kind of becomes that on Twitter. And then like I'm not saying I'm separate from it at all. Like I'm definitely the person who just like sits there and watches it and goes, "Oh man, this is so dumb." But then I sit there and watch it for like 3 hours. So like who's really dumb in that situation?
Very true. But yeah, it's I think in some cases too, like social media kind of forces you in many ways to have an opinion or post something out. And I think also, with Twitter especially, there's a lack of nuance. So somebody's gut reaction, you're with friends, you may be like, oh, I hated that movie, or oh, I love that movie. But then if you were to write a review, you might have a much more nuanced review. But that's kind of on Twitter, you don't get that. And so it's interesting. But what I will say, because I'm very interested in what my co-hosts have to say about it, and so we'll talk about that. But I do want to say, whether you like the movie, whether you didn't, somewhere in the middle, haven't seen it, it's okay with us. We have, like I said, we have. I know we're going to have sort of different feelings about this movie, and I think the big thing when these discussions come up, whether it's here or social, it's important to remember that these are just our opinions. You can love the movie, you can hate the movie. That's totally cool. And so yeah, like I said, so we're gonna talk about this as I always like to do. I just want to very quickly, so we kind of know where we stand. Let's just get a very quick, feeling of the temperature of the room. Bryan, what do you think of the movie? Did you like it? Did you hate it? Were you somewhere in the middle?
I gotta be perfectly honest, I really was not a fan. And I say all that, I'll just say right off the, right out of the gate, I know there are people who really enjoy this. I know the reasons that I'm going to explain why I didn't like it are going to be the things that are going to be, people are going to be like, what the hell are you talking about? But it really wasn't for me. It didn't hit the notes I was hoping it would hit. I was kind of going into it hoping we were going to get something akin to Halloween Kills, which we are very much on record on this show as saying Halloween Kills is just so over the top weird and like gets so much wrong that it just becomes its own weird, entertaining, just kind of piece of Halloween lore. I was hoping for something like that here. I did not get that. So, yeah, I just wasn't into this one.
Evil dies tonight.
It's going to make it into every episode.
That's interesting because I feel like for me, Halloween Kills, I feel like actually prepared me for this new installment of Texas Chainsaw Massacre, just because coming out of that, I felt like anything was possible right now with the slasher subgenre. And I will say, I will preface this by saying I'm not 100% on board with everything that happens in this movie. And also this franchise, I'm a little more flexible with, just because I've spent way more time with Freddy, Jason, and Michael than I have with Leatherface growing up. So those franchises I feel a little more attached to, I suppose you could say, just from all the hours spent watching Halloween 4 and 5 on AMC Fear Fest over the years. So coming into this, I was really just looking for an adrenaline ride, and in that department I was very entertained. So it was actually, for me, it was, as just from the adrenaline standpoint, I was a happy customer.
And Derek, it's interesting you mentioned that, because that's part of the reason why I don't think I was bothered by all the wrong turns that Halloween Kills make, because I'm not as like invested in that series. I enjoy the Halloween movies. Clearly the original is a classic, but the Texas Chainsaw Massacre is one of my top 5 favorite movies. Yes, I'm a very basic human being, oh yeah, like, do you also really like the original Nightmare on Elm Street? Yes, I do. But, it's it's one of those movies that, like any good movie, has evolved as my understanding of it has kind of shifted, and it's only gotten better over time. So it's just, it's one of those movies that I feel in my gut. So this, and maybe that's unfair to go into a new entry because, like we always say, any new entry isn't going to take away from the old one. And, that's not my issue. I'm not saying like, this completely disrespected the original. But, I do think there is something to how emotionally invested you are in previous entries as to like how a new entry is going to impact you one way or the other.
That is a good point. Yes.
Now, this is an interesting one for me because I like, and I really like the original Halloween. I've said this before. I really like Texas Chainsaw Massacre, or the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the original. So I'm not super invested either way in where, sequels go for either franchise. I do have to say that while there were elements of this movie that I did like, I do lean more towards not liking it to like neutral rather than like liking it to neutral. This just didn't, and maybe, who knows, maybe it was the way I was watching it or whatever, but like there was just and we can get into this more in detail, but there was just like an intensity that just was missing from this. It didn't, for whatever reason, like none of the scenes really played for me the way that I think they intended to. Whereas like I had fun watching all of the insanity that was Halloween Kills, and I couldn't deny the fact that it held my attention the entire time. That this movie just didn't. But yeah, so like I said, we'll talk about this in a little bit more detail and kind of dive into this, into these opinions a little bit more. I guess let's talk, let's talk a little bit about the story. I'm going to, kind of maybe suggest some topics and then we'll kind of organically go from there. But this, the story's, quite interesting for how they set things up. I'll say that I do like what they do to set, this group of teens or young adults up with Leatherface, and that they have this like, this nearly abandoned town in Texas, and these I think they refer to them as influencers. We'll say young influencers, or, it does seem like I said, some, Gen Zers that have some money, whether it was as being an influencer, whether they were, they have rich parents, whatever the case is, they were able to, essentially, buy this town, and they're selling it at auction, trying to turn it into what seems like a new Austin, and being able to, in order to do that, they have to, move and kick people out. And of course they pick this town that, Leatherface happens to live in, and him and the adopted mom, I'll say he's with, we're not too happy about the fact that they're being kicked out of their home. And, I think on, even though I had some issues with the execution, I think the setup to kind of get them there was kind of interesting and fascinating. It's almost, as I was watching, it kind of felt a little in the beginning like what do you call it? The House of Wax, the 90s House of Wax from Dark Castle, and that you have this kind of like town that's staged, that's empty. And so I will say that at least from like an initial setup standpoint, that they did kind of hook me on this. I'm like, okay, so you can have like Leatherface running through this town, and I do like the fact that we're dealing with these, like I said, Gen Zers. We'll start with you, Derek. Like, what did you think about the story and the setup that kind of gets us to Leatherface running back around?
I think it's a good entry point. It's definitely not exactly what I expected. I kind of stayed away from the trailer, other than the now iconic sunflower field shot, just because I had to see that. So I thought it was kind of an interesting way to kind of bring a new generation into it. And I really liked how they incorporated the kind of recap of the original movie on as a true crime TV show that's on in the gas station. I think that was a really interesting way to let you know that, hey, those things from the first movie happened. Now it's 50 years later, and here's this next generation that's going in the same general area. So you kind of, I think it's a good way to bridge that gap. And the town itself is interesting because looking at it from just as a viewer, I kept thinking this looks just like, it looks like a movie set. Like it almost doesn't feel like a real town in a way. And in some ways it makes it feel like the movie itself is very contained, even though it's not like just set in one room or one house, but the town itself just feels very contained. And it's a kind of a pretty straightforward setting and almost looks like, you're just on a movie set, which is kind of this weird nightmare logic that comes into play, because literally it's just like all these things happen like on the same few blocks of the street. And then the car repairman kind of pokes his head out and is like, what's going on out there? Because everything is just so contained. But I did like how they kind of initially set up this culture clash. You see how there's, the younger generation and then the older generation, and then they throw Leatherface into that. So I think it did a really interesting job of like showing, hey, here's, two very different types of personalities that are living in this environment. And, here's the good and the bad of both of those groups. And then here's Leatherface, and he is going to go after everybody. So I thought that was kind of an interesting setup.
I do want to jump in just briefly, and then Bryan, I'll turn it over to you to get your thoughts. But I did want to note for our listeners that because this movie's already been out, it's been out for a week already, we know a lot of people have seen it. So we're going to put up the spoiler warning here. I do want us to be able to have an in-depth discussion about the movie and talk about it in detail, including the finale, which I think is important for us to discuss. So so we're going to, like I said, discuss all kinds of spoilers. And I do want to give a warning to our listeners. But Bryan, I'll turn it over to you.
So in terms of the setting, I like the idea of the setting. And the fact that it was shot in Bulgaria actually never crossed my mind. I didn't know that they didn't shoot it in Texas, to be perfectly honest. And I know some complaints were the fact that they shot it in Bulgaria. But if anybody's driven through Western Texas, like you will see towns like that where there is absolutely nothing. There will be, a town, quote unquote, that is maybe a dozen buildings, and then it's a whole lot more nothing. So, for me, there was nothing about that came across as being like synthetic or, that didn't, rub me the wrong way. So that was really cool. And I like the idea of kind of like this town that time forgot and forgot it for a reason, being revisited by people who kind of don't know what they're getting into. I think what rubbed me the wrong way was that the people that they introduced to this was just this kind of interchangeable hodgepodge of, like, in the synopsis, they're referred to as influencers, even though I didn't really see anything in there that pointed toward them being influencers. They talk about, they're kind of represented as all of the tropes of Gen Z. They drive automated electric cars. They're vocal about, when they see the one Texan with the gun, the one sister is very vocal about kind of, mouthing off to him. But they just come off initially as more annoying than anything. And I think on top of that, if we're playing with this idea that, gentrification doesn't just happen in the cities, which I fully agree. The fact that they're kind of putting that on the shoulders of Gen Zers / influencers / I heard them referred to as hipsters at one point. It just kind of, there's just a tone deafness to it that just kind of stuck with me. I don't think that was something that was necessarily going to make or break the movie for me, but it's already kind of starting off where I'm kind of withdrawing a little bit. So I again would have really liked to have seen something interesting with that gentrification discussion. I just don't know that they kind of got the ball rolling the right way.
Yeah, this is something that, because Bryan and I had watched this on Friday, and we had a pretty decent discussion afterwards. And, this is something that we both kind of talked about, is that I feel like although the setup for the movie was good, there is some confusion about the message that it's trying to send, or the how it's trying to portray these characters, and maybe stuff was left. There's evidence that there's stuff left on the cutting room floor where we could have gotten and probably should have gotten more character development. I mean, the movie's about 73, 77 minutes, whatever the case is, with credits. And so, it's under 80 minutes. It doesn't mean that you can't have a great movie under 80 minutes. A lot of the Universal monsters, the first round of movies are. And so the length of the movie doesn't necessarily determine quality, but it does feel like we don't get some of that character development and explanation that we might need before things get bloody. And like I said, I do think there, like you said, an element of tone deaf when it comes to these characters' motivations, because you have. And I think one of the things, and I'll just go out and say it, is that you put a lot of these things on the shoulder of a black character, because you do kind of, a lot of this stuff, sits on Dante's shoulders as kind of causing this. So kind of dealing with that fact, and the fact that you kill off your black characters. They do try to, there's, like I said, they try to do stuff with the Confederate flag, and it doesn't really make sense what they're trying to say with it. And by the end of it, they kind of toss any of this story aside. And so you wonder how much of that did they even need in the beginning if it was going to be ejected by the end. And so, I definitely feel like there was, a lot of people will say, and I agree, that like, the screenplay and the script is like a blueprint for the movie, but it doesn't necessarily mean that that's what the final piece is going to be. I haven't seen the screenplay, so I can't say what changed between the original concepts and where they want these characters to go and the final piece. But I can say, because I know in a lot of cases they'll lay the blame in reviews or in comments on social media on the writer or the director. It's hard to say what the case is, but I will say that it's very hard to ignore the fact that this has a kind of a confused message that just is not clear what they're trying to say by the end. And so, yeah, so like I said, so I definitely had a problem with that.
And I've heard the argument that, you might be reading too much into it by letting that bother you. And, I don't mean specifically you, Jonathan, but like for those who that bothers, they're reading too much into it. It's just a movie. It's a premise, but it's also like, well, they, like you said, Jonathan, like this didn't really add anything at the end of the day to like the overall story. So they didn't have to put it in there. And by putting it in there, they invite that kind of like exploration and analysis. And if they don't do it right, then unfortunately it's going to cause an issue in terms of how well I can enjoy the movie. Like, do I have to 100% agree with somebody's politics to enjoy a movie? No, but if they're going to be kind of this clunky with it, it's certainly going to hurt the final product for me.
Yeah, and there is like an element of, and I remember telling you too that I do kind of like some of the things that they're playing with, because sometimes I like seeing stories where like everybody's bad. And it's kind of like, and so if that was the message they were trying to get across, I can kind of almost understand that. But again, by the end, to me, it's not clear. But like in the beginning, you kind of see them saying like, okay, like, they definitely, or even throughout a lot of the movie, they definitely paint, Gen Z as like, they do show them as kind of like self-absorbed. They don't, what do you call it? They're buying this town. They don't care who they're kind of screwing over. You find out that they're, that they didn't have the right to kick out. Mrs. C and Leatherface and results in what happens. But then you also see some of the characters like Dante, when he finds out, doesn't really care. You have the influencers who are just kind of taking pictures on the bus. It's it's stuff towards the end. It's definitely like not painting these characters in a good light. Not that they have to, but like I said, so I do think there's kind of something interesting in dealing like these kids are bad. These people that live in the town are bad. Like everybody's bad. But then again, I don't feel like anything happens by the end.
Yeah, it is interesting. And that's where, I don't 100% agree with, some of the things the movie might be saying with some of those decisions that ended up making it through. And then by the end, it feels like some of those ideas were abandoned or everyone just gets killed off anyway. So it's like you don't really get to explore some of those themes as deeply as maybe you thought you would by the end of the movie. But I guess what I took away from it is they're trying to show like, hey, this side, like, oh, this group coming in, they might rub you the wrong way a little bit, but they're not all bad, but they're also not all good in their actions. But then and also showing kind of like two sides, I guess, to each group, and how there's this kind of culture clash between these two very different types of personalities that I think, they're trying to show, I guess, trying to tap into that a little bit. But I do agree that it's, sometimes I think there could have been a better way to explore that. And, and like I said, it could have been a longer runtime, but kind of selfishly, I really enjoyed how this movie was actually like an hour and 21 minutes, just because, movies are so, like, the average length of movies, there just seem to be so much longer these days. And it was just so fun to sit down and watch a movie where it just kind of gets right to it. Like, it reminded me very much of the cynical kind of early 2000s slasher movies that we got back then, where it's like they kind of just dive right into it, and then you learn about the characters as the story goes along. And you do sacrifice some story that way too. So it's definitely not a foolproof system, but I did kind of enjoy just going along for the ride, but albeit definitely there's some problematic stuff there too.
I was going to say, if you want to look to how that discussion was done right, the original really gets into it's having a similar discussion where it's, kind of the suburbs and kind of the American dream, kind of wiping out working class America, and you have these kids that are coming in to where, the Sawyer family, they can't really, hold their jobs at the meat plant anymore. They can't make a living out of that. They're just kind of scraping away however they can. And so they've resorted to cannibalism. But I think they did a good enough job in the original to, they didn't put giant flags on each one of these kids' head in the original one to say this is a Gen Zer, or this is this trope, this is this archetype. It's something that's, if you look back and kind of drill in a little bit more, you can start to have those conversations about to what degree were those kids, did they not have business being there in the first place? And I think we've had a couple of episodes where I've gone to bat to say it's a home invasion movie and Leatherface is really the hero, but they weren't able, I don't think, to really duplicate that in this one. And again, it might be unfair to compare it to the original, but if you're doing some of this, trying to have some of the same conversations in the same series that the namesake is based off of, then that's got to happen. I can't, you can't help but to make those comparisons.
I was going to say, I did want to take a minute to talk about some of these characters, because I think that'll kind of lead us into some additional discussion there. And I did want to start with the movie's main character, as I see it anyway, and that's Leatherface. So Mark Burnham, and obviously we have a whole cast of characters we'll get into in a minute, but I do want to call out that Leatherface is a character throughout the different movies within this franchise. And some are better than others. Everybody has their favorites, but I will say, regardless of the fact that I didn't love this movie, I actually quite liked Leatherface. I thought that Mark, who played him, did it with the role has quite a bit of physicality, and just you can play Jason a little bit differently, you can play Leatherface a little bit differently. I liked how this Leatherface moved. I know it doesn't make any sense that in his 70s he can move like he does, but I did feel that this was an imposing, kind of unstoppable force. So for what they were going with, I did like this Leatherface. I did like I said, how he was portrayed. I did like Leatherface's Leatherface, and so let's talk a minute, like I said, about our main character. So what did you guys think of Leatherface?
Yeah, I really enjoyed the portrayal here from Mark, and the physicality I thought was just pure nightmare fuel. I mean, I think there's nothing more horrifying than Leatherface just coming at you with that kind of lumbering like run that he does, which, kind of almost has like a little, it kind of seems like it could be how someone, who I could see that being a realistic depiction of, someone who's maybe a little more up there in age coming at you with a chainsaw. I mean, it's not a full on sprint. He's still coming at you in that kind of lumbering run. That's just really, there's something really horrifying about that there's a lot of personality that comes out in that. And it reminds me kind of like the pre-zombie Jason Voorhees, where he would just kind of run at you instead of doing the walk all the time. So I really enjoyed the physicality of what they brought out in him this time around. And there's that great shot. I know I saw some people talking about it on Twitter, but you can actually see him without the mask sitting in the chair when Dante is first going into the house upstairs. So I thought that was really interesting. I think Sarah Yarkin's character was in there walking around as well. But yeah, so I think they did some really interesting things with that part of it. And of course, we got our iconic sunflower field shot, which to me felt really random, but I really loved how they put that in there, just because how can you not do that when you have a giant sunflower field right there? So I thought it was interesting. And I have to say too, the walk onto the party bus where he's walking in there, I thought was really menacing. And that to me was maybe the freakiest part of the whole movie, was just him walking onto that bus.
Yeah, this version of Leatherface is interesting because, kind of like Halloween, where there's the various, side quests and choose your own adventure installments, things like that. We've seen a lot of different variations on Leatherface. This one is very different than the original, but I think there's definitely a reason for that. The first one is coming from like a scared point of view, like almost like a big kid who's kind of freaked out that these teenagers are coming into his house. This Leatherface is a lot older, and we don't know how he's been spending his time. He seems to have been, for lack of a better term, dormant for the last 50 years since the events of the first film. You get the sense that is because of the relationship that he has with Alice Kriege's character. But kind of when, obviously when she goes, you're looking at a Leatherface that's coming from a different point of view, which is one of kind of revenge. And he has it out for all of the people that led to kind of his surrogate mother's death. So I think that does lead to, this is going to be a different kind of a Leatherface. And I think I did appreciate what Burnham did. I did appreciate where he got his face from in this one. You kind of see him doing that like little field creation of his new mask based off of his surrogate mother. So there's kind of a lot of interesting things going there. So yeah, I like the way he portrayed it. I think that carries a little bit, though, if we're talking about kind of the Leatherface sequences. Jonathan, I know you and I were talking about how they ask you to suspend disbelief kind of one too many times, and it accumulates over the course of the movie.
Yeah, I do feel that as much as I like the Leatherface performance and his look, there are some scenes to me which just felt out of place. It was like, and Derek, you mentioned it, like the sunflower scene. Like he just pops up for that quick second, but to me, I was almost like, and I'm not sure what was left on the cutting room floor. To me, it always fascinates me. What did they film? What are the alternate takes? What was the original plan? And then what did we end up seeing? It does seem though like maybe there was a chase in the sunflowers. I mean, given the location, that makes a lot of sense, right? And that he did chase one of the characters in there, and that would make sense for why he'd pop up, right? And to me, like that would be like that's why, for me, a lot of these scenes kind of fell a little flat because they're just, it kind of moves one thing to the next, but it doesn't give you a chance to really absorb anything. So I think that sunflower scene is kind of like a perfect example of that. It was a cool looking shot, but it didn't didn't amount to anything. They didn't really use that scene in anything, but it could have been terrifying, right? We could have made fun of it in the trailer, but it could have been terrifying to see him hunt somebody down in there, but we didn't. So I was surprised by that. And then of course there are some things where like, there are little things, right? I know somebody's going to hear this and be like, "Oh, you're being picky here," but like the chainsaw needs gas. There's like, there's things where the bus is like going by. The bus, like the last like wheel of the bus is like passing Leatherface, and he's able to run up and like chainsaw it to stop. But like those are
might
things.
have thrown it. We don't know.
Yeah, exactly. Right. But those are things where like you would think that you could kind of like easily kind of fix those things where it would be like, well, it's the start of the bus and he kind of runs up to it. So there's a few things that like for, and I mentioned before, like for his age and like for these scenes they set up, there's like some really cool setups and some really cool ideas, but it feels like that like connective tissue or, the original plan maybe didn't make it to the final version. And I ran into that for me too many times where it ended up being a little, like I said, a little jarring. And I mean, I did have similar issues with Halloween Kills, of course.
Well, sorry, go ahead, Derek.
Oh yeah. Well, and with Halloween Kills, as we know, we won't know until we see Halloween Ends, exactly how that's going to play out. But it does seem like there's definitely some supernatural enhancements there going on with Michael Myers and how he's able to accomplish certain things, within that own realm of nightmare logic. And then this one, it's very grounded. So I definitely can see how it is a little easier to dissect some of the things and find those flaws, because this is on pretty much every level a very grounded story, even going so far as to show why Leatherface is doing what he's doing instead of, being a little more ambiguous about it. So I can definitely see that. But what I really love though is just how abrupt. I kind of like how abrupt and jagged the story is once the kills start, because it just feels like there's no really fanfare to it. Like when he goes in and he kills the police officer with the gas tank, it's so like it's like Leatherface isn't in a movie at that point. Like it feels like, no, this is what I'm going to do because that's what I want to do. And now I'm going to go back to cutting this face off of my surrogate mother. And it's just that to me is just so horrifying, where it almost feels like a little disjointed, almost on purpose, or just because Leatherface don't give a damn. I don't know. but I just love like how unapologetically brutal it is at times with the once the kills start. And I think that kind of bleeds into the story as well, where it's just like, this is what's happening and that's just how Leatherface rolls. But I could also be reading way too much into it too. So, but I really enjoyed. I found that much more horrifying than like a 20-minute, chase scene. I just think this Leatherface is just so much more abrupt and brutal.
So, and I get where you're going with that, Derek, and it kind of goes back to that discussion of Leatherface is very different than he was. And you're probably looking at a Leatherface who he's in his 60s, 70s, so he can't be chasing people all around, the state of Texas. He doesn't probably have that stamina anymore, so he needs to, take them out, fairly quickly. But I think for me, one of the things that was kind of telling, I did listen to Heather did a really great interview with director David Blue Garcia, and he is clearly a fan of this franchise. He clearly has a love for the material. But one thing that he made a note of saying is that he was working very hard to create these kind of iconic shots and these iconic. Well, no, it was specifically iconic shots, and he wanted something that, people were going to remember. And I think when you're pushing for getting those iconic shots instead of kind of letting the story, building the story and letting them grow kind of more organically, then it seems forced. And you see those situations where it looks like they had the visual in mind and they kind of built kind of reverse engineered from there. And for me, that shows up. going back to Jonathan, you'd mentioned, when the bus is going by, there's that really creepy shot of Leatherface standing in the alleyway as the bus is going by, but it doesn't set up to make it make sense for how he was able to then, get catch up with the bus. Earlier on, there's a sequence where one of the protagonists is trying to kind of stealthily get down the stairs. And at one point, she kind of hops down and she looks up, and this whole time she's been like making the floorboards creak, and like her small frame is doing things that give away where she is. And then she jumps down and then she looks up and Leatherface is standing right there. So this giant hulk of a man is able to get through this house without making a single noise. Again, I get that there are people probably listening to this saying like you're thinking way too much into it, but this happens so many times, it just builds up. And I think it goes back to that idea of when you're just trying to make things look iconic, it's comes at the expense of kind of making them organic to the story.
Yeah, I do think. I mean, I think visually there's I think visually there's quite a few stunning shots, and like I said, and so I do think this is a really good movie to look at. I think part of what allowed us and likely others to maybe be a little pickier, focus on what might be considered minutia in other movies, is that I feel like, and I mentioned this earlier, that this movie didn't pull me in. And I feel like this movie had some issues with confusing tone. For people that found it scary or that really got pulled in, like that's great. I'm not, I'm happy for you. I really am. Because then that means that the movie, worked as they intended. But for me, there were a few things that just kind of pulled me out of the film and just didn't provide those tensions and that tension and those scares in a way that I hoped that the movie would. Again, I mentioned the sunflowers. Like I felt there was room there to make it scary. When you see Leatherface stand there about to go after the bus, there was kind of room to make that intense. But I do think that it's interesting because you could really call this movie, a dark comedy, because there are scenes, that I'm seeing, and there are setups that are kind of more played for laughs, and even if it's not like an out loud laugh, it's more of like a chuckle or a grin than it is to scare you. And I think one of the best examples of that is when Leatherface gets on the bus. I'm not saying that it's not unrealistic that you have a bus full of influencers and they take out their phone to start taking pictures of him and live streaming. I actually think that could happen. But it's the fact that they kind of went for that over maybe the other ways they could have scared the audience with that scene or made that scene very terrifying. And because you have that like tone of like Leatherface gets in and it's kind of weird, awkward, a little funny as like influencers like take pictures of him, they're not really scared of him. When he starts sawing through them, and it's a brutal scene. It is an actual massacre in Texas Chainsaw Massacre. For me, I didn't feel like it was really scary, or it didn't, really pull me in, because I kind of got pulled out with that phone scene. But I think there are other scenes throughout the movie that are maybe a little less apparent, but still kind of feel similar. So every time like I wanted to be pulled back into the movie, a scene either took place too quickly or there was something there that just kind of pulled me out.
Yeah, I think there was a way to make that phone gag work. And I think it's the nonchalance that everybody just kind of like in unison brings their phone up. Nobody seems bothered by the fact that he just threw somebody's head onto the bus. Yes, maybe they didn't see it, whatever. But like someone's covered in blood holding a chainsaw. Even if I'm pulling out my phone, like, I at least I get the instinct to be like, we need to, like, we're isolated here. We need to kind of broadcast this to, maybe it will, help get people's attention that something is going bad here. But just the fact that they took that beat to have everybody like do the synchronized phone poll, and then the line with, try anything and get canceled, that just like you said, Jonathan, like it takes the wind out of the sails of the rest of what's supposed to be kind of like the pièce de résistance of the whole movie. Like, this is supposed to be the centerpiece. And I, like you, Jonathan, I was just like, I probably stopped rolling my eyes like a third of the way through the sequence, so I didn't see most of it.
It is definitely, there's some tonal shifts in the movie where it does seem like it wants to be a dark comedy in some respects. It wants to be like a straightforward hardcore slasher in other respects, and then even like a character drama as well. And I guess I was so along for the ride, even though it totally was very much its own thing at that moment. The carnage that followed was so, I just couldn't believe what they pulled off, like what David Blue Garcia and then his cinematographer Ricardo Diaz, what they pulled off by in such tight quarters in that scene is it just is amazing that they actually, I just appreciate that they really went for it. Like, it would have been really easy for like everyone in the movie, like for them to just leave, because it rained and maybe like the bus left and it left some of the characters behind and like all those people got away. And it like budget wise, that would have made more sense. Story wise, it probably would have made more sense, but they're like, no, we're actually going to do this. And I know in that, that Corpse Club episode with Heather and the director, David Blue Garcia, he talks about how Leatherface walking into that bus, that's like the first time he's really meeting the modern age. Like, he doesn't know what a computer is. He's just like, that's him meeting the world as it is now for the first time. And there's this total culture clash there. And then of course things get very bloody, but yeah, it is totally, I guess I see the entire scene as so gleefully absurd that I just was like, okay, let's do this. I mean, but it was, and then just some of how creative they got with the chainsaw and like essentially making it like the shark from Jaws, kind of like how they had done earlier with Sarah Yarkin's character beneath the house, how the saw was like a shark coming after her. I felt like they kind of they tried to like amp that up on the bus, and it's like it had a mind of its own. And it really like it definitely I don't know. I feel like they took a big swing with it, and they definitely, missed on a couple of things, but I'm glad that they actually like swung for something a little bit different, I guess, even at the risk of striking out a little bit.
You make a great point, and I do think that I think it's important, at least that our listeners know, and I don't know like, Brian, how you feel on this, but like, I always am on the side of like, I would rather see a filmmaker like swing and miss than make us something that's like boring, or like we'd see those like, I don't know, they're like studio picks in the early 2000s where they were remaking and rebooting things, and like those things feel soulless. So like, that's why I said I'm like neutral to negative on this, but I'd rather see him swing for the fences, as long as it seems like in many cases the creative team here made the movie that they wanted to make. And while I don't think it was entirely successful, I would rather see them given creative freedom and be able to, throw things at the wall. Is the tone what we expect? No. Is the movie what I was expecting? No. Did I love all of it? No. But the bus scene, I mean, it kind of going back to the, the statements from the director, and, did they, have quite a few iconic scenes which like easily stand out? Yes. And so, I mean, they definitely achieved that, and definitely made some scenes that, like I said, that get people talking.
And it's interesting too, that, with how David Blue Garcia came onto this, like he originally wasn't the director. I know they had two other directors on this who, there were some creative differences. So David ends up coming in, production's already started. And like, so I feel like what he was able to pull off with coming into it as late in the game as he did. And I know he had Fede Alvarez and Rodo Sayaguez, who provided like the story for the film, and they were on board as producers. So he had some really good company to kind of help him out. But for him to come into this, and is as early in his film career too as a director. He had I believe one feature film prior to this. Like I'm really impressed with who knows how much control he had over certain things, but I feel like he directed the hell out of the movie as far from like a technical standpoint, and really making shots creative and filming the action in a certain way, even if the story is a little bit all over the place.
So I think one character we haven't talked about, we've kind of talked, obviously we spent a lot of time talking here about Leatherface. I do think, and if not, we'll spend some time talking about some of the influencers as well. But I do want to talk about Sally, because Sally's back. And I think exactly. And so I think this is an interesting area because, I think that Texas Chainsaw Massacre, from a like pitch perspective or a business perspective, was sold on, giving this the like Halloween 2018 treatment. And so Sally is kind of like your Laurie Strode character, but Sally is definitely, the character is definitely used in a different way in this film. And so, we'll just start with you, Derek, but wanted to see what you thought about Sally's character, the fact that they use the character at all, and then how the character was portrayed in the film.
Yeah, this definitely, I know, has been a big talking point online as far as the Sally storyline. And I do think this is where a longer runtime definitely would have benefited having that character in this movie. I mean, for starters, Marilyn Burns, who passed away in 2014, originally played Sally in Tobe Hooper's Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And so now you have Olwen Fouéré, who is coming in, and I think she does a great job playing this character. Obviously, it would have been wonderful if Marilyn was still with us to have her come back. But I thought Olwen did a really good job doing what she did with what she had to work with. But I definitely think that whole storyline is a little bit shoehorned in there. And I think it would have been a good idea to either save her as like an after credit teaser for another movie, or to take some other parts out of it and make more room for her character in this movie. But at the end of the day, I'm just glad that Sally does get to come back, because I do feel like of all the horror movie survivors, I feel like Sally Hardesty gets left out of the conversation a little bit too much. I feel like she gets overshadowed. And if it hadn't, they don't know when they made this movie, like, are we going to get another one? Like, will we get a chance to pay respect to Sally and the characters from the original, her friends that didn't make it? And so them not knowing that they might, they might not have the chance to have Sally involved in a future movie. I'm just glad that they did something with that character, because I know it feels like a retread of 2018's Halloween and everything like that. I know it's impossible not to make that comparison, but I am just glad that she got a moment in the spotlight again, and that we did get to see her again, even if it, is yet another element that's kind of out there for this movie and maybe doesn't fit into this movie. I did enjoy seeing her again. I liked that she got to face Leatherface and confront him. And I thought it was a really nice touch that she mentioned the names of all of her friends. And, it's probably maybe a little too simplistic than she deserved. And she obviously definitely deserved more screen time. But again, I'm like, if it didn't happen now, would it have ever happened? So I'm like, maybe this was the last chance. So I guess I'm just glad that she got something, but I wish she had gotten more.
I'm going to be honest. I would have rather them not revisit her character than revisit her the way they did. Actually the most promising thing based off of the trailer for me was the fact that they cast Owen Fiore as Sally, with Marilyn Burns obviously having passed away. I thought she was a perfect casting for that. I love her in Mandy. I really liked her in an Irish movie she did called Sea Fever. She was really good in that, and she just kind of has that look of like a weather-beaten Texan. So I thought she was a really good fit for it. I thought she played the character well for what she had, but like it's not even just that they took their cues from the same things that Halloween 2018 was doing. It was almost like they were counting on you having seen Halloween 2018 so that they didn't have to put any of Sally's backstory into this movie, because there is just so much that's left unexplored. Like she's clearly, the implication is that she has been living in the house from the original movie, like the Sawyer house, since, I don't know, for I guess 50 years. So you're going to tell me that someone's been through what they went through in the original movie and has decided to not only stay in town but stay in the same house where it all happened. Okay, like if there's reasons for that, they didn't give any reasons for that, why that would be. Also, you realize she has also been living in the same town as Leatherface for the past 50 years, and they have never crossed paths, and she doesn't know he's still alive, I guess. There's just, again, it's another area that's completely not explored. And then by the time you do get to her, she, they're kind of, you forget she's in the movie for a good chunk of it. And then when she does come in, she just makes a bunch of decisions that seem to be more based off of letting the movie continue than making sense for what her character would do. Like, she freezes up and lets Leatherface go because reasons. I don't know. She was shocked by the fact that he couldn't remember who she was. And all of that just seemed more like it was a plot necessity than it was something related to the story, because they couldn't end the movie where it was. And so it just seemed like a series of either unexplored avenues or weird decisions made for a character that just wound up, just all of it fell flat for me.
It's interesting because, hearing Derek's opinion and, about, and you mentioned that, if we're going to get, one more movie and we get Sally, like this is a time to do it, or you'd rather see it. And, I think it's an interesting point because like, I would have said I would fully have been in support of that if Marilyn Burns was playing that character. And to me, then that completely changes it, right? Because then it's like, we got an opportunity to do the new movie. We have the actress that played this character, and we can continue this story. And to me, that feels like a little more like urgency to do it and being able to tie it back to the original in a way that to me feels like probably the right thing to do. Whereas, and I understand also, and I guess keeping that in mind, also I feel like you probably have this catch-22 because I assume, as I mentioned, I'm making an assumption here, but assuming that the movie is kind of sold as being like a Texas Chainsaw meets Halloween 2018. So it's like, we're selling this on Sally, like now we got to use her. But I actually think, having watched the movie, that some of the things that I feel like we could have used more time with you could have reinvested in our new characters if you removed Sally completely from the movie, because she's not living like in that small town that they're buying. So she's not interacting with a lot of the characters. She's completely separate until the very end. So those scenes with her, the interactions with her, I would much rather have seen, more time with our main characters, who's, Melody. I think it's Melody, Lila, Dante, Catherine, Richter. I mean, I'd like to see them develop that stuff, because again, it seems like there's more. We have Elsie Fisher's character. We see that she's gone through some trauma when she was younger. It appears it's a school shooting is what it seems like. I don't know if they say it directly. We have Sarah Yarkin, who's Melody. She's dealing with the fact that she's now responsible for this woman's death because they're evicting her and they don't have the rights to do it. you have Jacob Lattimore who's playing Dante, and he's he it seems like he learns this and he's still okay with it. He's like, hey, we're buying this town, we're doing it. And so, like I said, I think they kind of set up this dynamic between the characters. They have Melody and Dante kind of, being in on this business venture, but being on opposing sides when they find out that that they've wrongly evicted, these people. And, like I said, I think if these relationships had given a little bit more time to grow, I think if you could have built a little bit more of the tension up. Again, it runs quickly, but with the 70 so minutes or so, give an extra 10 minutes back to these characters, because I did actually, like I said, I think they were strong enough. I think the performances from the actors were strong enough. I think the setup for these characters was strong enough that they didn't need Sally.
Yeah, it would be interesting to know what the exact blueprint was, how, the movie, was Sally a driving force in getting the movie made. But I don't know. I thought it was interesting. I guess, when you are having it as a sequel, not that it's really necessarily completely blocking out the other sequels. It's kind of more of an expansion on the timeline. But a direct sequel to that original, maybe that was just their way of, reminding people, hey, this is, if you like that one, you'll like this one. But I don't know. It was interesting. Yeah, I agree. This movie definitely did not need Sally. It's just nice to see her. I guess I liked having that character come back and knowing that she was a Texas Ranger and that she, was able to live, somewhat of a functioning life, even if she was dedicating it to hunting down Leatherface and whatnot. But it was definitely one of the more, I guess, out there, divisive moments of the movie for sure. And obviously it didn't work out for Sally in the end, but I did enjoy the fight between her and Leatherface. I thought was the choreography of it and everything I thought was quite interesting. But yeah, I can see why it feels like maybe a very, in some ways, a watered down version of the Laurie Strode storyline from the new Halloween trilogy, or even going back to Halloween H2O. So it's kind of like you got to pick which path you want to go down. But if they never make another, I'm guessing they'll make another Texas Chainsaw Massacre movie. But if they didn't, I feel like this is kind of the last chance to pay some homage to that character and and get some of the ties back to the original. But they did it at their own risk.
Yeah, for sure. And so, I think we're kind of working our way more towards the end of the film. And so we do see, Melody and Lila, and they're evading Leatherface. With Sally's help, they're able to, kind of escape, buy themselves some time, and they square off with Leatherface at the end. I am curious. I mean, I'm not, we can, like I said, we can just ready to give a spoiler warning. We can straight talk about the ending, but I don't want to give my opinion. I'm just what do you call it? A humble moderator and facilitator. But I am curious I am curious to hear what my co-hosts think about the ending, because it was interesting to say the least. I have thoughts, but first, as we kind of rotate a little bit, Brian, what did you think about the film's ending? And Brian, by the way, I'm going to pause here just for a minute for our listeners, just to say we can hear, I know Derek and I and the listeners, we can hear the pain and struggle in your voice. And I do also want to pause here for a second to say that this is also your birthday. Like, this is like, you're subjecting yourself to some shit here, man.
It's more just like, I feel bad about the fact that I've been shitting all over this movie the entire time. Like, I've tried to keep it as kind of civil and thought out as I can, but it's also just like, I don't like spending entire entire shows just like telling you all the things I didn't like about something, but it's just everything about this hit me the wrong way, and I think that even extends it to the ending where again we're going for that idea of like what's a good gag and what's like going to make for a good iconic shot. And they really had to stretch credibility stretch suspension of disbelief to make me believe that these two girls would get into a self-driving car, turn on the autopilot, and start letting it roll down this town at 5 miles an hour or whatever walking speed they were going to allow for, and again, one less spoiler alert, it turns out they did not kill Leatherface. He bursts into the car, pulls out one of the sisters, and decapitates her in front of the other one while she helplessly is in the car driving away. And then they kind of mirror the ending of the first one where Leatherface starts dancing, except this time he's got the sister's head in his hand. I just, again, it's like you can't force those iconic shots. It comes together the right way in the first one because of all the stuff that built up to it, and the fact that it's kind of mirroring, Sally, she's getting away, but she is clearly broken from this experience. And there was that, right up until the last seconds, you're not even sure she's going to get away because Leatherface is running after her. And that end dance is just this kind of like, this like transcendent, just bursting forth of kind of like rage and frustration from Leatherface, and it just makes perfect sense. And it's one of my favorite endings in all of horror. It actually might be my favorite ending ever. And to try and mirror that and to do it in a way that feels so cheap with that self-driving car, just again, it just irks me and falls flat.
But you got to admit, it made more sense that he caught up with this vehicle.
Yeah.
So there's the silver lining.
It just didn't make sense why the vehicle was going that slowly.
I have thoughts, but first of all, I did want to comment on what you mentioned about, being negative about a movie, or, I would say, first of all, I think you and what we always strive to do here is be very respectful. And so, I don't see this as you shitting on a movie. We all want a movie to be good. We were all excited to, when you hear a movie like this is announced, you're hoping for the best. So you go into a movie, and I know that we all do here. We don't go into a movie wanting to hate it. We go in wanting it to be good. We understand that a lot of people work hard on making this movie. It's, everybody's, in most cases, like I said, everybody's trying their best. And so, these critiques are coming from a place of, we're fans of these types of movies. We're fans of movies and entertainment, and we're sad that it's not, that it didn't connect with us. And in other cases too, what we're saying is we're not making fun of, we're not making jokes at the creator's expenses. We're not making fun of them personally. What we're doing is, like I said, saying, hey, this is why the movie did not work for us. We always, everything we always say, I feel like, and what I always set when we do it, whether it's Daily Dead or Corpse Club, say, hey, if we write in our review, and I always tell everyone, be comfortable with what you're saying being heard by the people who are making the movie. And if you'd be comfortable saying it to their face, and it's, write it, say it. And so I do feel that, like I said, anything that we say, and whether it's this movie or Halloween Kills or whatever, it didn't connect with us. But I think, again, like we're not being disrespectful. It's just a fact it didn't work. And I think for us to say that it did work for us when it didn't, that would be more problematic. So anyway, just that little PSA.
Well said. No, well said. That's a good, definitely a good reminder. And, especially with, obviously this is a very divisive movie, and there's a lot of conversations online about it. So it's exciting to see this many people talking about a Texas Chainsaw Massacre movie. And I'm hoping that it'll mean that Netflix will put money into making more of them. But obviously, I hope that it also doesn't just, we we don't want to further divide the horror community. So it's let's, try to do it respectfully, and then we can all, if this one didn't work for you, maybe the next one will, because there's quite a conversation around this one, and maybe that'll lead to more.
Yeah, and so taking it back to the ending, because I have some thoughts. But first of all, Derek, what did you think about the Tesla ending? It just like the bus massacre. I was on frayed nerves by the time this ended, because I was watching the movie alone. It was super late at night. I was just in that perfect mindset, I guess, for this movie, and it really took me back to like early 2000s. Like the Marcus Nispel Texas Chainsaw Massacre remake from the early 2000s, and just that kind of grimy, dark slasher at times, even though this one has obviously going for the comedy a little bit more. But to me, it worked just because I felt like they had been through so much hell, like the last act, like those sisters and Melody and Lila, like they, from the car accident to the showdown in the theater. And I absolutely love the money shot of Melody. After the gun, they tried the guns on Leatherface. He still wouldn't go down. And then it was the chainsaw that she took, and that money shot of her swinging that thing up like a boxer and uppercutting him. And then it like freeze frames on that. I just loved it. So after all of that, and to have them, getting away, it just felt like so mean spirited and abrupt, and like it fully embraced what Leatherface had done up until that point in the movie anyway, where I thought it was just such a mean joke to play on the characters and the audience, but in a good way. So for me, it worked, and it was, again, them just taking a really big swing with the self-driving car and kind of laughing at themselves a little bit. And I mean, this movie might be the most dated movie 20 years from now, just with all the technology that they use and like how, dated this might look when some time goes by. But I just like they really, for better or worse, they really held true to like leaning into all of those details with technology. So I thought it just kind of kept it on the same track it had been going on at that point. Yeah, I mean, I have to say, because I've, in a lot of cases, I kind of lean a little bit more towards Bryan, but on this one, I like the Tesla bit. There's something about the fact that you set it on self-driving mode. Like at this point, like I already knew what movie we were in for, and like some of the ridiculousness of it. And there's just something about that. That last scene is like she's like reaching out helplessly as her sister is beheaded, as the car kind of just drives away on its own. And I also think, again, when I was talking about like the tone of the movie or the message, like, again, I feel like it's not clear and it gets muddled throughout, but you can almost see, like I said, pieces of it where they're trying to talk about like, you could say talking about reliance on technology or trying to comment on it. And again, I don't think it was successful. Overall, like I said, I do kind of like them using it at the end. So anyway, I do think that even though the movie as a whole didn't work for me, I did think that bit was kind of cool.
Yeah, it's certainly it kind of it's kind of like Nightmare on Elm Street, where someone gets pulled through a window, but then then they get their head cut off. So, but I feel bad for Melody, the character, because I do think she was one of the more likable characters. She had remorse for things that had happened. But she was also like, I'm not going to let you, kill my sister. So I thought Sarah Yarkin and Elsie Fisher in particular really did a good job with that. And especially Sarah's character had a lot of physicality to it. It definitely kind of reminded me of some of the stuff like Jane Levy went through with Don't Breathe, and just, I feel like, she had to go through the ringer a little bit in this movie. So it didn't feel fair for her character, but I feel like for that shock ending, it did the job. Yeah. And then we got a post-credit scene too.
We did.
If you stuck around for that at that point.
We did. We saw the post-credits. Yeah, so that kind of brings us to the end of the film. We got some other things we're going to talk about, but I do want to kind of wrap this up in a neat bow. So we'll give everybody kind of 30 seconds to give their final thoughts on the film. Brian, we'll start with you.
I think I've made my stance pretty clear on this. I don't want to belabor a point. This one just wasn't for me. I get that a lot of these things are items that other people either liked because of, they liked the movie in spite of, but they were just things that, when I saw it, it was just something that continued to take me out of the movie in various ways. And I think that's kind of the biggest thing that you can do to make me not like a movie, is do things that take me out of it. And there was just too much of that for me to enjoy this.
And Derek.
I would say, just from an adrenaline, getting my heart racing a little bit, I guess, taking me back to a different time a little bit, for better or worse. It did the job for me, but I definitely know it's, as a whole, not perfect, but for me, the parts that worked, and mainly the choreography, the fight scenes, particularly the Richter versus Leatherface fight. I mean, they found a way to really cleverly stage kills, and I don't know. I feel like it gave a little bit of everything. I feel like it definitely, for me, worked a lot more in the action and the suspense. The social commentary is a little all over the place, and so I feel like that could have been handled maybe a little bit better, if they did want to make some of those points. But for just getting Leatherface into the spotlight again, hopefully more people will go and check out Tobe Hooper's movie, and then I feel like we'll be getting another one, hopefully with as much buzz as there's been around this one from both sides of people who enjoyed it or didn't. So long live Leatherface.
Yeah, and I'll just say, I think this movie, for me, I thought, like I said, Leatherface was great. I like the design. This movie was gory. There's some iconic scenes, but I think this movie lacks tension. I think that this movie has a confused tone. I think it doesn't know if it's a horror movie or a dark comedy. I think that makes this a challenging movie to really be invested in. I do like a lot of the actors. I do like what they set up with a lot of the characters. I do feel that some of this was, again, muddled or tone deaf in terms of the message they were trying to say. I know some people will say, hey, well, it's just a Leatherface movie, or it's just a Texas Chainsaw movie. What do you expect? And I say we can always ask a lot from our movies. And we just, like I said, there's always an opportunity for someone to create something great. And if the movie connected for you and you think it's great, that's cool. If you didn't, that's cool too. But I'll still go see the next one. So there's that. And anyway, we have some other topics to discuss. We're moving on from a lengthy discussion on Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I promise our listeners and our co-hosts that the other topics we won't take as long to discuss, but I want to make sure that we follow up on some of the other, whether it's shows we've been watching or books we've been talking about. So I do want to talk about Peacemaker, because Peacemaker wrapped up, and maybe you didn't like Texas Chainsaw Massacre, but if you haven't seen Peacemaker, I will guarantee, I'll give 99% chance that there is, like I'm a weatherman, that you'll find something to smile about. I know that Peacemaker for me has been a bright spot when it comes to new series for 2022, and I think this one's going to be hard to beat. It's funny, it's gory, it's action packed, character development's great. The dance sequence I can't get enough of, and it's already been greenlit for its second season. So I do think probably one of the best things I've seen so far this year. I know we're only 2 months in, but like I said, this one's going to be hard to beat. Brian, I know you watched it as well. What do you think? And ahead of this, I'm just going to give a spoiler warning. We will talk about some spoilers. So if you haven't seen Peacemaker, spoilers are ahead.
It sucked too. No, I'm just kidding. This one I actually quite enjoyed. Yeah, it's kind of James Gunn at his James Gunniest, which I don't think is surprising considering he wrote the whole thing during COVID, just as kind of a lark. Like he was just kind of keeping himself occupied. I don't think he really had any um, big expectations that it was going to actually get any traction. Thankfully, it did because it's, if anybody wants James Gunn kind of returning to his Slither roots, this is going to be a really good show for them because it's taking his Slither sensibilities and putting them into the DC universe. So this is a very hard R, or I guess it's TV, so it's a hard TV MA rating, and all the gore, nudity, and foul language that comes with that. But it's all kind of done through that James Gunn lens of, he knows when to be stupid and he knows when to be smart and he knows when to kind of bring some, sympathetic aspects into his characters. And I think that's probably the biggest magic trick he does with this whole series is that it's a group of people who on paper are not sympathetic at all. It's a group of mercenaries. One of them is the son. The main one, Peacemaker, is a kind of an alt-right bonehead who's the son of a white supremacist. He is every ist you can probably think of. The people around him are various levels of kind of what's the word I'm looking for? Like consciously compromised, just willing to do things for an organization that really aren't on the level, but everybody kind of gets their own beats to develop better and have some kind of a redemption arc in some form or fashion. I also absolutely love Danielle Brooks. I think her interactions and her chemistry with John Cena are probably the best part of the whole show. They work very, very well together, and I'm looking forward to seeing how that evolves into the second season.
When they first announced the show, after I saw Suicide Squad, I was like, how the hell are they going to make me care for this character? and they did. And then I was also, when I was, I saw maybe the first trailer. I don't watch the full trailers, but I see little clips and things, and I was like, I hope to God this doesn't become like another like character that idiots look up to, like Punisher, right? Because how tough is it with like people like, with the Punisher skull and stuff like that, and even after like John Bernthal and creators around, what do you call it? The creators of the show kind of decry like people who kind of like take it or using Punisher for their own means. Like you don't understand what Punisher is. It's almost like Rorschach in the new Watchmen TV series that people have done that with the Punisher. So I was worried that people were going to kind of do that with Peacemaker, and James Gunn and crew were able to create a character that is, and I think this is one of the things that we're kind of talking about or alluding to a little bit when we're talking about Texas Chainsaws. It's okay. Like characters don't have to be, and I do see this argument online from time to time about how characters have to be morally correct. That doesn't necessarily need to be the case, right? Any movie, or work of art, or fiction that's trying to portray, real life, you're going to have characters that are flawed, right? And so what I thought was interesting about this was a character who you kind of clearly hated in Suicide Squad, and throughout the series kind of pulling back the layers and showing what is it that created, this person and made them act the way they are, and can they change? And I think that they handled that in a way that, I think one of the interesting things, Brian, and I think you'll probably agree, is that I think at the beginning, it kind of, maybe sucked in everybody. And then by the end of it, it was like, this guy is clearly anti-white supremacist, anti this, anti that. Like he is not the character that you may have thought he was. And so I thought that was I thought that was very interestingly handled, because he was such a problematic character at the start.
Yeah, the fact that how well they play with the emotional baggage that you bring from your upbringing, but also not letting that just be like, not writing that off, and not having that sense that, he's not accountable because he had such a terrible upbringing. It's playing with those ideas that, yes, you're a product of your upbringing, but it comes to a certain point where you need to make your own decisions and, be responsible for yourself and the way that you act. And I think that the interesting thing, because I think they wrap up the season in such a way that it could have been like, if this just stayed as like a limited series, which there wasn't ever a guarantee that this was going to get multiple seasons, it works perfectly well as a series finale, or as a limited series. But kind of what they carry over is that idea that, his work on, like, becoming a better person isn't done, and the ghost of his father is going to keep haunting him, and they show that literally, like, the and I guess, we need to talk a little bit about spoilers. It's not a huge spoiler, but at the end of the show, kind of one of the last shots is him sitting on his porch, with the ghost of his father sitting next to him, just kind of showing that baggage is going to be around for quite some time. And so I think they give you just enough to be interested in how things are going to play out in a season two. But I also appreciate that they didn't just leave this, this field of cliffhangers out there just waiting for, like, these are all the things that you're going to have to come back for next season. It was uh, uh, it was a very satisfying conclusion, but they left just enough kind of open threads to carry into season two.
Yeah, I definitely need to watch this series. I really enjoyed James Gunn's The Suicide Squad. So I'm trying to, does it have the or not? It's kind of the question.
I think it's
with a lot of movies
I think
these
I
days.
dropped I think I dropped the from it. It's getting
Honestly,
confusing.
Can we please drop the trend of just doing like weird tweaks, or not even changing the name of a movie that you're doing a sequel for? Like, that was Texas Chainsaw Massacre 9.
Right.
Halloween 2018 is Halloween whatever number. Like, Scream, it was Scream 5. Just put the number at the end. It's okay.
They say, I guess the market research proves that the numbers don't work. I've seen some of it. Apparently, you have a guaranteed, like, drop off if you have a number after your movie, because of the people who have never seen the first one, and they assume that they can't possibly catch up. So that's why they've been doing it.
Boy.
It's like that should be like a thing of honor. Like, it's showing that you survived. So you've made so many movies. Like, that's longevity. You should be ashamed of that.
I agree. I totally agree with keeping the numbers in. Trust me, but I also know why it's unlikely that's gonna. I don't think it's gonna go away.
Yeah, it's not going anywhere. But yeah, this is. I've definitely heard everyone I know who's watched this has really enjoyed it. So, it definitely sounds like it'd be up my alley. And there's so much on HBO Max in general that I need to check out. So it's kind of one of those things. Eventually I'll probably get access to it, and then we'll start going down the list. But in the meantime, I'm just catching up on my Netflix and Disney Plus and whatever, or Hulu, and all sorts of good stuff. So,
and some reading, as I understand it. I think you have a book you were going to talk about.
Yes, definitely. Yeah. So I finally got around to finishing Mexican Gothic by Silvia Moreno-Garcia. And this book came out fairly recently. It came out in 2020. And the kind of a brief rundown of it is it takes place in 1950s Mexico. This young woman named Naomi, she gets a letter from her cousin Catalina, who recently got married and was kind of whisked away to this secluded mansion in the Mexican countryside, And in this letter, Catalina's like, you got to come help me. She kind of has this ominous tone in the letter, like something's not right. I really need you to come and get me. And so Naomi goes to the mansion in the middle of nowhere, and it's kind of got this classic like Hammer Films kind of setup where it's this mansion at the top of the hill, and there's a village beneath it where everyone says that the house has a very haunted history, and that the people that live there, they came over from Europe, and there's kind of some issues of colonialism that are explored there, and there's kind of a haunted history connected to that. So basically, Naomi gets there, and weird stuff starts happening. Like, she meets the family, she realizes something's off, but she doesn't really quite know what. And as she spends more time in this mansion, she realizes that she herself is now in danger, and all sorts of weird kind of hauntings and psychedelic experiences and nightmares start to happen. And, I think if you're looking for comparisons, I would actually call it like Get Out mixed with The Haunting of Hill House. It's kind of that vibe, and it's really it's kind of slow burn horror, but once it really gets into it, it gets into it. So that was a fun one to read.
So I'll admit that I started this one, but my COVID brain just wasn't kind of letting me push through. Like you had mentioned, like I think it does start off a little bit slower, and I just hadn't gotten to the point yet where I think it starts to ramp up. I really need to get back into this book, and I think I just need to start. I think digging into all of Silvia Moreno-Garcia's stuff because this sounds like it's great, and also her next book, Velvet Was the Night. Like if this is if Mexican Gothic is her take, obviously on the Gothic novel, Velvet Was the Night is kind of her take on like the noir detective story.
Oh yeah.
So that sounds really interesting to me. So yeah, I really need to. I think my brain is finally starting to like unflab a little bit, now that maybe just possibly knock on all the kinds of wood and cross all of your fingers. Maybe we're seeing the light at the end of the COVID tunnel. I know we'll all believe it when we see it at this point, but my brain is starting to turn back on again. So I think it can handle through the slower buildup of a Mexican Gothic until it gets into the truly creepy stuff.
Yeah, and it definitely the back half is really where Silvia ramps things up, and it's quite a payoff. And they are doing a limited series adaptation at Hulu, so I'm thinking eventually we'll be seeing an adaptation on that streaming service. I'm really curious to see how they bring it to life on screen. But yeah, it's really cool to see the haunted house perspective, in like 1950s Mexico, and there's a lot of really interesting issues that are explored, and it's such a cool way to experience that story through a perspective I'd never seen that story told before. So I'm really glad that Hulu's going to be doing something with it, and yeah, in the meantime we've have a chance to catch up with it.
Nice. And I know that Bryan, you had a game you wanted to talk about.
Yes. So, welcome back to Bryan Christopher's Horror Nerd Gaming Corner. I've been just getting more and more over the last couple of years, as anyone who's listened to some of our previous episodes, just really getting into RPGs, specifically horror RPGs. Been doing a lot of fun stuff with the Alien RPG system, doing some different stuff with horror versions of like Pathfinder, things like that. And so this past weekend, I played a game I had never played before. It was a first time run through of a game called Zombie World, which is from Magpie Games. It was, kind of one of those platforms, or one of those systems that they went through the whole Kickstarter thing, and they had their coming out, and this was one I stumbled upon. It was as simple as I did a Google search for, good horror RPG games. And it was like a top 10 list. And the one that caught my eye about this one is that it's card based rather than dice based. And the cards, there's just all different kinds of cards that will feed into the initial premise of the scenario. Kind of the overall universe is you're kind of like in a Walking Dead sort of a season one situation where the zombie apocalypse happened maybe like 6 months ago, and you're kind of neck deep in the how are we going to live 5 minutes from now. You haven't restored any kind of infrastructure. There's no makeshift electric company or anything like that. Like, it is back to the dark ages, and there's zombies wandering around. So it's a game that's based off of getting through the day rather than getting through a period of months. And the cool thing about it is that there is a game master, there are playable characters, PCs, just like with an RPG, but it doesn't require anybody to do any work beforehand. You come into the game, and part of starting the game, and you plan on maybe a 2 to 4 hour session. The first probably solid half an hour is setting everything up. And you do that by first setting up your enclave, which is your setting. The core system starts with, you can either be in a hospital or a prison, and that comes with certain advantages. And then you, along with the group, choose things that are scarce within that setting. So certain like food and or like maybe you don't have privacy or creature comforts. There's no generator in there or something like that. It'll dictate what type of character you have in terms of, there'll be cards for, this is what your kind of present role is in the apocalypse. But there'll also be hidden card that will be your past. So, what were you before the zombie apocalypse that maybe people don't know about? What trauma do you have? So, how are you going to act in ways that might not be, necessarily for the good of the group because of the trauma you've endured? And so these cards kind of serve almost as like if you think of this as like zombie improv, these are all kind of the premises and the catalyst for getting things going. And then it just turns into kind of like, you keep yes ending with the group and talking about the different directions that this story can go. So it's one of those things where you kind of have to be on your toes and be ready for the different ways that the stories can zigzag. But I really appreciate that it's something that you can just, as long as the basics of how to get started, you can just kind of pick it up and go. It doesn't require people to come in having done, like a few hours of homework to develop their characters, or for, specifically the GM to have done hours upon hours of prep work to make sure that, there's a story or an outline of a story. That all gets taken care of just at the start of the game. And so, you just come in with the box. You come in with, I think you need at least 3 people, so 2 PCs and 1 GM, and you can play a game, and it's fun. You don't have to worry about whether or not, like, there's no beating the game. It's more just kind of taking it through to a satisfying conclusion, even if that satisfying conclusion is that everybody dies. So I had a lot of fun with it, and I'm looking forward to playing it again in the future.
Nice. I like how it's like kind of, it's just ready to go too. Like, you can just jump in and especially with that setting too, it just seems like there's a million different ways that the story could go or things could go wrong. And I'm still, I know some people have zombie fatigue, but I'm still ready for another 20 years of zombie stuff. So that sounds really cool.
Yeah. As long as it's good, I'm always down for something with zombies. I don't get tired.
Plus, it's a great entry point for if there are people who, like, if you're interested in the idea of role-playing games, but you're kind of, I know it can be intimidating to get in some of these larger systems. This is a really good entry point for that, because, it will show you what the guardrails are for a given scenario, and then you can just kind of play in that sandbox.
Nice. Yeah, it's not like you have hours and hours of trying to figure out even just how to start, which can be intimidating if you're new to it.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Yeah. Well, with that said, this episode of Corpse Club comes to an end. And I do want to take a minute to, I guess to kind of acknowledge, and I do think it's important to state, because especially because Brian, you mentioned, still kind of being in a pandemic, and it's hard because some people could say, and maybe sometimes I might think even in my own head, like, why are we talking and going back and forth on Texas Chainsaw Massacre when there's so many horrible things going on in this world, right? And it's tough, and I think a lot of us probably face that these days. And what I'll often say with Corpse Club is that this is what I enjoy about this is that it's my time to get together with some of my friends. I haven't seen Derek in ages. I haven't seen Brian in person. We've talked about it for ages. We can't because we're staying in. And so this is an opportunity for us to get together, to catch up, to talk about things. And so we hope we provide you with some entertainment. And like I said, we know things aren't easy. I do want to, though, take a moment just to, again, encourage everyone. There's still so many people out there who are suffering and dying of COVID. Make sure if you haven't gotten your booster, get it. It's proven that it helps. If you know people that haven't gotten the vaccine, encourage them to do it. It's, statistically speaking, it helps. I know there's breakthroughs, but like I said, it helps. We wish everybody the best. And it's not just COVID. I have to say, because, a lot of my time today has been, back and forth trying to get some work done, but also seeing, what's going on, in Texas and taking rights away from trans kids and putting parents of trans kids in a terrible position. And so I do want to encourage our users, or our listeners, I should say, to also, take a moment if you can, amplify messages, donate, and do what you can to help spread positivity and good in the world and kind of fight back. There's all these things that are kind of chipping away at us, whether it's COVID, whether what's going, on in Florida or Texas. And a lot of people they're just fighting to live and to be given an equal chance, and they can't. And so, like I said, there are some resources. I have, Marissa Mirabal, who posted to Twitter and put together some good resources. If you're looking to donate or spread the word, check out Planned Parenthood, the Trevor Project. There is ACLU Texas, so you can check them out as well. And I will say that for anyone who wants to make a donation, and we've done this before, if you want to donate in support of trans rights in Texas, if you want to donate in support of queer rights in Florida, if you want to donate to your favorite cause, whether it's helping people with COVID, whatever you think you can do to make a difference, we do want to acknowledge that and incentivize. I know that's not the only way you're doing it, but I know it's tough out there for everyone. And I want to say, if you take a second and make a donation, help spread the word, help some people out, then, what we'll do is I'll give a free Corpse Club membership to anybody who wants to send us proof of donation over the next 30 days. I'll send a Corpse Club t-shirt your way if we can mail it out. And so just contact us at contact@corpseclub.com and just send me the receipt. You can blank out any details you want, and I will be happy to. But like I said, we all got to kind of do our part, and like I said, and try to spread some positivity. We can't let, as easy as it can be, these things can kind of eat away at you. I know it does to me from time to time. I may not be the most active in being able to push things out or being able to amplify or donate or help a cause in a given day. I try to within a month or a week, but some days it gets you down. And so if you're feeling like that, just know you're not alone. And like I said, we're all stronger together. So like I said, so if you can make a donation, spread the word. We want to help too.
If I can just
of course
add on to that, just because I do want to thank the fellas Trace and Joe over at Horror Queers. They put out a couple of recommendations of places that they were donating to. In addition to the ACLU of Texas, they also donated to a place that I followed up with and donated to myself called Out Youth, outyouth.org. They're out of Austin, Texas, and they are an organization and safe space serving LGBTQ and allied youth. So, if you're looking for some kind of an organization that's, kind of in the belly of the beast, as it were, they're a good one to donate to.
Thanks, Bryan.
Amen.
Yeah, thanks. Really appreciate it. And and again, we don't have all the answers. We don't claim to be the experts here. But again, so some people be like, well, why are you talking about this on Corpse Club? It's because it's hard to not talk about this stuff, right? To me, it's kind of easier to kind of, in some cases, kind of focus on. So it's hard to talk about entertainment sometimes when you see what's going on in the world. It's a tough week for a lot of people. So just everybody stay strong. Let's do our part, and we'll catch up again soon on Corpse Club. I do want to, I don't think it makes sense to kind of go through the latest spiel, but I will say that if you need to reach out anytime, you can reach out at corpseclub.com. And if you need to message us, we're at Daily Dead News or at Corpse Club on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook under Corpse Club. So if you want to send any receipts or reach out, that's how you can do it. Thanks again for listening. Until next time, stay scary.